We are so excited to be able to introduce to you DeEtte Decker, who is from the PCUSA in Louisville. She serves in the Office of Innovation, where she works at the intersection of faith, leadership, and adaptive change. Her work focuses on equipping leaders and churches to move beyond maintenance toward faithful experimentation, helping the church to respond courageously to cultural, organizational, and missional shifts. Sounds like us. DeEtte is particularly known for her work with mid-councils and congregations, navigating innovation, property reinvention, and systems change with theological depth and practical clarity. She holds an MDiv from Louisville Presbyterian Seminary and has also served as a director of Christian education and later as an associate pastor. Has loads of experience and wisdom to share with us today. DeEtte was born and raised in Kentucky, and she remains deeply shaped by her roots. She's married and the parent of 4 children and brings to her work a grounded and practical perspective formed at the intersection of faith, family life, and innovation. So please help me warmly welcome DeEtte Decker.
Thank you. Hey, y'all. If you don't mind, I really would like to just come down here and join you. Is that all right with y'all? Can I just, all right. Okay. Okay, great. I'm old school, no slides this morning. At least come to the workshop if you want slides. I was telling my friend Emily this morning, I don't think I'm built for this weather, y'all. -9? Is that the norm here? Okay, all right.
I did that just for you.
Oh, thanks. Gee, thanks, Kathy. Y'all are so nice. It is just, I cannot express to you how excited I am to be here. Over the course of this last year, I've gotten to know Kathy and the team a little bit better, working on some property reimagination. They're part of a cohort that we've put together in the Office of Innovation, and my goodness, are amazing things happening here in Scioto Valley. Wow, you're an impressive bunch. So I hope I don't disappoint. Thank you for having me. I bring you greetings from the National Office in Louisville. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to begin today with a story from Laurel County, Kentucky. Back in the day, early in my career, before seminary, before pastoring, I worked on, don't hate me, an eminent domain project there, a bypass being built around the historic city square. The goal was sensible, practical. Wanted to reduce the traffic flow and keep folks safe. It was efficient. It was practical. But in real life, it was about people. It was about their homes, it was about their businesses, it was about the farmland that had been in families for generations. And among those people were Mr. Glenn and Miss Lorraine. They had lived in their home for more than 30 years. Miss Lorraine had had her babies in the upstairs bedroom. In their first year of marriage, Mr. Glenn had built himself his woodworking shop out back. He loved to spend hours there crafting and making things. And if truth be told, I think escaping Miss Lorraine. That woodworking shop was his refuge, and that home was Miss Lorraine's sanctuary. When they learned that the bypass would take it all, they were grief-stricken. They weren't angry, They were mourning. They weren't asking me about appraisals. They didn't want to know about market value. They didn't have a lot of questions for me other than, ma'am, exactly how are we supposed to let go of this life that we've built here? I didn't have a lot of answers for them. I just had a promise. I promised to walk alongside them. I promised that I wouldn't rush them, that I wouldn't disappear, that I would travel this new road, whatever it might be, whatever it looked like. I would walk it with them. So every time I came to town, I made a point of letting Miss Lorraine and Mr. Glenn know I was in town. And what happened was every time I was in town, Miss Lorraine whipped up some great tuna fish sandwiches and pink lemonade. And we had lunch together. And they told me about this life they had built. The family stories, the babies, the grandbabies, the great-grandbabies. Their hopes and their dreams and their assumptions of what would take place in that house, not only for those generations, but for generations to come. Sitting around their kitchen table with the maps rolled out and clean lines drawn through lived-in land, I learned something that I did not yet have language for. Resistance to change is rarely about stubbornness. It's about losing the roadmap that once made life make sense. Friends, the church in the United States right now is grieving the roadmap that once made life make sense. For much of the 20th century, the church was formed for a world that was relatively stable. A world where Christianity had some privilege, where Sunday participation was assumed. If it was Sunday morning anywhere in the U.S., the whole community showed up. Growth followed proximity. This is often referred to as the age of association, and it began somewhere in the 1800s. People joined organizations and institutions to help them find meaning in their life and to live out their purpose in the world. During this time, folks found refuge and sanctuary, purpose and meaning in organizations and institutions, but that world no longer exists. We now live in what's known as the age of authenticity. Anybody heard that before? Yeah. People today look inward to discover and express their true identities apart from organizations and institutions. And we see this playing out in the life of our churches, right? We know that young adults, our younger generations, are spiritually curious, but institutionally skeptical. For them, trust in institutions has almost completely eroded. A recent Pew Research study shows us that the Christian share of the U.S. population is declining. The share of Americans who do not identify with any organized religion is growing. Today, fewer than half of Americans belong to a religious congregation. Friends, we have to acknowledge that many of the roads that once reliably delivered people to church no longer carry the same traffic. We are leading in what Bob Johansson from the Institute for the Futures calls a VUCA, V-U-C-A, a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. In a VUCA world, past experience no longer predicts future outcomes. Problems rarely have clear causes and answers. It's complex. The church was not designed for this environment. The church was not designed for a volatile, unstable, complex, ambiguous environment. However, we are being called to lead within this environment. And like Mr. Glenn and Miss Lorraine, the church is grieving a world it once knew how to navigate. In his book, Think Again, Adam Grant tells the story of Ursula Mertz. I'm fascinated by this story. She was completely blind, but had no clue. She didn't know she was blind. When asked if she could see, she said, "Of course, yes, I can see." And when they asked her to describe things, she would describe in great detail objects and people in her hospital room that weren't there. She suffered from what is now known as Anton syndrome, and it makes me wonder if the most dangerous blindness is not what we cannot see, but what we're certain we already understand. Why? Because certainty has a way of convincing us that no further noticing is required. We know it. If we're certain that if something worked once, it should work again, right? And that familiarity is the same thing as wisdom. How many of us, raise your hands, how many of us have tried something in ministry that used to work only to discover that it didn't anymore? Yeah. How frustrating is that? Right? That moment, that confusion, that frustration, friends, that isn't failure. That's information. That is information. That is the moment that we discover that the road we knew by heart no longer goes where the traffic is moving. We are leading in a VUCA world where we are no longer leading in a world where best practices that used to form and shape us work for this generation. In this environment, the problem is not that leaders don't know enough. Y'all, we know a lot. We are wise. We have done the work, right? It's not that we don't know enough. It's that what we know expires faster than we expect. and we're left with this gap. The roads that once carried us faithfully, the programs, the structures, the philosophies, the idea of success, they weren't wrong. Those roads are just now closed. Not because we failed to maintain them. God knows we have maintained them. We have been faithful in that work. Those roads are closed not from our lack of faithfulness, but because the landscape has changed. And if we remain certain that we already understand how things work, we become blind, not to the future, but to the very evidence telling us it has already begun. This is why certainty is more dangerous than doubt. Doubt keeps us curious. Certainty convinces us there's nothing left to see. We got this, right? And faithful leadership in this moment is not about having the right answers. I'm going to say that again, because I hear a lot. If we could just figure out the right thing to do. Let me free you of that. Faithful leadership in this moment is not about having the right answers. It's about learning how to see again when the old roads no longer apply. We're not alone in this, y'all. This has been something that has been going on for millennia. Let me give you a few reminders. How about Naaman? The military commander in 2 Kings, he was willing to be healed, right? He just wanted it done his way. He was certain the prophet would come out, say the right words, perform the right ritual. But when healing came through muddy water and humbling instruction, Naaman almost missed it. Not because it was unclear, but because it was unfamiliar. Think about the Israelites in the wilderness. They knew what slavery looked like. They understood Egypt, and that certainty made them feel perhaps a little suspicious of manna. And that freedom felt frightening. It was unknown. It was uncertain. They weren't blind to God's provision. They were blind to the possibility that survival could look different than before. Then there are the disciples. Oh, the disciples. They were certain they understood the Messiah, right? They were certain they knew about power and victory and restoration. So when Jesus took that road to Jerusalem, not on a throne, but on the cross, they couldn't see it. Not because Jesus was unclear, but because their certainty had already drawn the map. Friends, in a VUCA world, what once worked does not reliably and readily work now. Scripture shows us and teaches us that God rarely builds the future along the routes we already know. God closes roads, opens new ways, creates on-ramps, and keeps asking the same gentle yet unsettling question. Do you not perceive it? Do you not perceive it? Faithful leadership today is not about defending the roads behind us. It's about learning how to see again It's about learning to observe when God is doing a new thing right in front of us. I think what makes this moment in our world especially challenging is that we're being asked to do something that might feel contradictory. On the one hand, I've just said that certainty can blind us, that being convinced we already understand how things work can keep us from seeing what God is doing now. And yet, faithful leadership requires us to imagine the future, not control it, certainly not predict it, but to take it seriously. That's why futurist and author Dr. Jane McGonigal asks a deceptively simple question. When does the future start for you? Tomorrow? Next year? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Raise your hand if you think the future starts tomorrow. Okay. What if you think the future starts a year from now? Right now. Okay. Folks are saying right now. All right. Now let me ask you a slightly different question for our context. When does the future of the church start? Now? Tomorrow? Kathy's going like this.
10 years ago.
Yesterday. Yeah, okay. We're all familiar with the phrase, the future starts now, and we heard it in this room, right? But Dr. Jane McGonigal, in her book, Imaginable, says that phrase is actually misleading. She says, and I quote, "If the future is a time when many or most things in your life will be different than they are today, how long from now does the future start? If many or most things in your life are different than they are today, how long from now does the future start?" Tomorrow? Today? Next year? 3 years? 5 years? What she's saying, in other words, is the future is not a feeling, it's not an attitude, it's a threshold, right? And when that threshold arrives depends on who you are and what kind of change you're living through. So I wanted to kind of beta test this a little bit. And I asked my friends and I asked some of my family members, when does the future start for you? My son declared his future starts March 6, 2026, when I turn 18, Mom, and I'm an adult. Okay, right? My daughter said May 2028, when I finally graduate from college. A friend of mine said, when this baby is finally born. Another friend said, my wedding day. For me, fingers crossed, 10 years from now when I hopefully retire. Same calendar, different futures. So let's play a little bit with this and think about, when does the future start for the church? Is it when the new pastor arrives? Is it when young families begin to show up? Maybe it's whenever the youth choir comes back. When the roof gets fixed or the boiler gets fixed. When Sister so-and-so passes away and maybe we finally get that endowment. Now I'm meddling, huh? Yeah, I've been a pastor. Many of us instinctively answered now, and here is the important, again, clarification, right? The future is defined as a time when many or most things are different. And if that's the threshold, then Kathy's right. The future of the church is not something that we're waiting for. We're already in it. Because the church is living and we are leading amidst dramatic change, declining attendance and giving, artificial intelligence, new technologies, hybrid worship, new patterns and ways of gathering and belonging. This is not distant scenarios. This is present tense, every day, every week, church life. And here's an insight that Jane offers that names what many of us feel but haven't said out loud. She writes, the person who answers the question, when does the future start, with the shortest amount of time is often someone who has recently experienced significant loss or shock. There it is. Grief. The church is grieving a world that we once knew how to navigate. A map that used to make sense, a road it could follow with confidence. And yet, especially here, especially now, we see signals of the Spirit's movement everywhere. Congregations partnering with schools and neighborhoods, food pantries. Online worship becoming real pastoral care for the homebound. Small communities of faith forming around shared needs in their communities, not shared history. The Spirit is at work despite our grief, regardless of the fear of the unknown, and in the middle of all of this ambiguity, the Spirit is moving and calling us to build and to travel new roads. The Spirit isn't waiting for perfect clarity. It's not waiting for institutional permission. It's not only in our sanctuaries, folks, but it's in our communities, it's in our neighborhoods. And the Spirit is moving not only through programs, but through relationships. The work of innovative leadership is not to bemoan the past or to invent the future. Our work is to notice where God is already creating new roads and have the courage to walk them. So I'm going to give you 5 practices on how innovative leaders build new roads. These 5 practices are perfect for a VUCA environment, and dare I say, are spiritual practices. 1, questioning. Asking what God might be doing now. Asking those in your community, in your congregations, what do you need? asking yourself what God might be calling you to, asking your leadership team, what is it that God has for us next? Asking what God might be doing now. 1, questioning. 2, observing, paying attention to lived realities. What is happening in your context? I want to invite you to, as stealthily as you might be able to, after your next worship service, watch the parking lot. Don't engage with anyone. Don't talk to anybody. This is why it has to be stealth, right? Because everybody knows, hey, I got a question for you. How about that meeting, No. Try and just, sit in your office, look out a window, do whatever you need to do. Spend 15 minutes watching what happens in the parking lot after service. Who's there? Who's talking? Who's not there? Spend 15 minutes on a park bench in your community. Look out the window during a Tuesday afternoon. Who's walking by? Observe. Pay attention to lived realities. Networking. Number 3, networking. Learning beyond our own walls and circles of influence. Right now, the Office of Innovation is working with the Presbyterian of Baltimore on a leading faithful innovation lab. We recently went through these, and I had them write, draw a circle on a piece of paper, and I said, I want you to write inside that circle, this is your sphere or circle of influence, everybody that you come into contact with that you feel like you have a sphere of influence in. And then draw another circle around it, and in that outer circle, write those folks that you don't have any connection with at all, but have influence within your community. Maybe it's the mayor, maybe it's the librarian, maybe it's the school principal, maybe it's, the nurse, maybe it's the mayor, I don't know. Whoever that might be, write it around that. Networking, if we begin to think of it as the spiritual practice of loving connection to those we are not readily in connection with, that's the networking we're talking about. We're not talking about leveraging relationships for manipulation or gain. We're talking about loving connections for the good of the community. Getting over those walls that we've created. Experimenting. I just said that we don't have to know the next right thing to do. And I mean that with all of my heart and soul. Why? Because we're living in a VUCA world. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so our contexts are not only constantly changing, but what works even within one presbytery for one congregation may not work for the other. This is not a one-size-fits-all world. So what does that mean? We got to play a little, y'all. We got to experiment. We have to try new things. And let me tell you something. If it doesn't work, that's okay. That's not failure. That's information. That's information. Experimentation is an iterative process. You don't ever get it right the first time. So let me just free your mind of that. But try low-risk experiments. So this Baltimore Innovation Lab, the whole thing is pointing them towards they have to do a Pentecost experiment. It's not a new program. And nobody wanting you to launch a new program, right? It's an experiment. It could be something as small and as simple as introduce bubbles into worship, Pentecost Sunday, to help the children understand the wind and the movement of the Spirit. Now, I did this. This is one of my favorite examples, and the example that I gave them. I did this whenever I was associate pastor of a small church in southern Indiana. And let me tell you what, for me to be able to introduce bubbles into the sanctuary was a huge deal. Is anybody really surprised? No, we're not surprised about this. But we overcome with lots of conversation, lots of understanding, and let me give you a key phrase that will help you overcome resistance, okay? What's your underlying value in that? If somebody is giving you resistance to an idea and say, no, we can't possibly do that. That's ludicrous. Okay. Can you help me understand what's your underlying value in that? Sometimes it helps to say, my underlying value, this is the phrase that I use to get the bubbles in the sanctuary. My underlying value in this is really helping the children understand a really complex idea and theology that we have, and a real practical thing that they use in everyday life and their experience as a child to make our faith come alive for them. Well, when you start talking about children's faith coming alive, very few people are going to tell you no. What's your underlying value? Here's another phrase you might want to pull out of your pocket. What might it take to get you to a yes? I learned this phrase from whenever I was a director of Christian education at Knox Church in Cincinnati from Adam Franchek, and I was blown away. We were in a session meeting, and we were, y'all, I'm not kidding you, debating the color of pew cushions. Right? Well, they had to remain red. They had to remain red. They had always been red. They have been red since I was a child in this church. Of course they're going to be red. Well, there's a proposal on the table to make them, God forbid, maroon. Crazy talk, right? And all of a sudden, I just saw him lean forward and say to this nice lady, I've heard you and I understand your value of tradition, but I'm wondering what might it take to get you to a yes? Experimentation, networking, observing, questioning. Fifth and final one, associating. Connecting faith to real life. Not only for children with bubbles, but for every generation. One of the, I call them sandboxes for this experiment lab. One of the sandboxes we played in was associating. And I had folks take they broke up into small groups, and they had to list things that they come into contact in everyday life. And then they had a column, they had to write rituals in our faith. So baptism, communion, prayer, whatever. And then it was some fun hobby. So something in everyday life, spiritual, sacred ritual, and some fun hobby. And then they had to make a list, and then I randomly picked and said, okay, now you're going to create a worship out of this. We had canoeing, wedding, and communion. And all of a sudden, they presented an experiment where there was a renewal of the vows for anyone in the congregation who wanted to participate at a local lake, and all of the couples were in canoes in the lake. And as part of, after the renewal ceremony, everyone took communion together. Now, what a beautiful picture is that? I was like, that could be a really fabulous experience. Associating, play around with everyday life things, and make our faith come alive. These aren't strategies, they're spiritual practices. And the more we do them, the more we question, the more we observe, the more we network, the more we experiment, the more we associate, the better we'll become. It will begin to be just how we move and operate in this VUCA world. I'm going to tell you real quick about Westminster Presbyterian Church. This is a church in Pennsylvania. And they decided to play with these spiritual practices. So they observed that several members were no longer attending church on Sunday mornings. And they noticed that several of the members who weren't attending on Sunday mornings lived in a nearby retirement community, in a nearby retirement home. And so they observed. So then they began to question. They began asking a series of questions. What was keeping folks from coming on Sunday mornings? Well, the residences of the retirement community, they pointed to health and mobility concerns, right? So then the church asked, well, if we provided a bus to come and pick you up so you could be part of our Sunday morning worship in person, would you do that? Likely not. Still health and mobility concerns, right? Okay. Do you miss worship? Oh, heavens, yes. You miss the community? Is our community still important to you? Absolutely. It devastates us that we can't be a part of it. Westminster then began to ask themselves some questions. How might they respond to this new knowledge? What resources did they have? What did this challenge, what opportunity might lie in this challenge? What was their responsibility to these members? Well, then they began to wonder about their network. Could they partner with this retirement community in some way? Could they maybe partner with local library volunteers or a business that might provide volunteers to run the live stream? Or maybe could they partner with somebody to fund the necessary and needed equipment if they were going to do this live stream in the retirement community? Where was the Spirit leading? So they began to experiment. They asked the retirement community, it's named Maris Grove, if they could begin to live stream their worship services in their little chapel theater area, so that any resident who couldn't physically attend worship on Sunday mornings could at least, watch worship there within the retirement community. They offered to equip it with just minimal stuff. Like, really, we're just going to have a screen and whatever. They trained residents in the community and in the congregation to manage the stream. And to their surprise, it took off. The outcome is that between 75 to 100 people attend this streamed service every single Sunday at Maris Grove. A lot of them are from different denominational backgrounds. Many of them are not members of Maris Grove, but they come faithfully every Sunday. And sure, this idea was initially resisted by some. Lots of folks worried about, this will encourage others to stay home. None of those kind of concerns played out. There was no new building, no capital campaign, just a new lane added to an existing road. What might happen if you began observing, questioning, networking, experimenting, associating? I want us to return to Mr. Glenn and Miss Lorraine for a minute. After a very long journey, they decided to, in fact, travel a new road. That road led them to a smaller home. A half acre instead of 10. Mr. Glenn's woodworking shop had much fewer tools and was in the attached garage instead of out back. And on the day that the movers were moving them into their new home, I stopped by. And there I saw Miss Lorraine proudly sitting like a queen on her throne in the middle of her new living room, pointing to where every little thing needed to go. She was not diminished, and she certainly was not grieving in that moment. She was filled with excitement, albeit a little unsure of what this new road might still hold. And she was very clear that she was incredibly happy to be in her new home. So I want to invite you to think for yourself, what do I need to observe? What questions should I be asking? Who is missing from my network? What experiments might I need to try? And how might I associate sacred practices, elements of ordinary life, and a felt need in my community? Because friends, the future of God, the future that God sees for the church, it's not going to look like the past. Because the Spirit is moving, not maintaining. May you have the courage to sit like Miss Lorraine in the middle of an unfamiliar room, trusting that this too can be home. And may you have the patience of Mr. Glenn, learning how to shape something new from the tools that you still carry, even when the future feels uncertain and unfinished. And may you remember and volatile and ambiguous that letting go is not the same thing as being lost, and that faith does not require clarity, only trust. And may the God who goes before you and all of us open your eyes to roads already forming beneath your feet, and guide you as you imagine and build the new paths of grace, courage, and hope. Amen.